welcome to this 5th episode of my new podcast, One Woman is Twice Two Soldiers. I'm your hostess, Caitlin, with 20 plus years experience in sewing and 12 plus years experience within living history as a hobby. This podcast explores historic wardrobes and sewing, myth debunking stories and episodes from my adventures within living history, and also some about how I've incorporated things I've learned from the 19th and 20th centuries into my everyday 21st century life. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, I'd love if you consider following along. Last time we debunked some more Victorian dress myths, and this week we're going to look into dressing the 1860s baby, specifically from birth to about a year old. So without further ado, let's get started. We'll begin with footwear. Patterns for little knitted stockings or knit or crochet booties are all over needlework books and ladies' magazines by the 1860s. But unless it was very cold, clothing itself covered a newborn's feet, so footwear wasn't strictly necessary unless the mother wanted it just for looks. Once a child starts to move, parents may invest in soft little felt-soled slippers or little embroidered or braided baby shoes that are often found in ladies' magazines. Like women's stockings, baby stockings could be of any natural fiber, but the vast majority of patterns I have found for either call for a woolen or a cotton yarn. Because stockings don't change much for the 19th century in terms of style, design, and fiber choice, stockings can be very hard to date within the 19th century. And museums often have very broad date ranges for 25 years, 50 years, or even an entire century. Because again, stockings can be very hard to date. Stockings can be made at home or they could be purchased as well. There's a bit of a fashion for colored or otherwise fancy infant stockings in this era, but white and plain white at that is often seen as most practical. By the mid-1850s, we do see the rise in aniline or synthetic dyes, which means very bright or very saturated hues are possible even in cellulose fibers such as cotton. Although by the early 1860s, not all shades were possible. The first aniline dyes produced were more cool colors, such as blue and purple, with the warmer colors such as red and orange and yellow not coming in until the very late 1860s. But even with natural dyes, you can get very vivid and bright colors, much more than people expect, especially when you're dealing with protein fibers such as silk or wool. Having colors that were very color fast and would stay true even through the harsh laundry practices of the day was a must for something that was going to be laundered as frequently as baby clothes. And after being rinsed with bluing that would counteract with the yellow wear and tear on white, white would still appear to be bright white even after much use. If you're looking for patterns or designs for infant footwear, I would suggest searching ladies' books such as Godey's Ladies Book or Peterson magazine. There are whole knitting and crochet books, especially in the 1840s and 1850s, that would kind of carry over to the 1860s, particularly for things that don't change much, like baby stockings. And those are very easy to search online for free. You can use search terms such as infant shoe, baby shoe, infant stocking, or stocking for an infant to find the patterns. A lot of these little slippers that you'll find patterns for aren't made for children who are walking outdoors. They're very soft-soled, and the soles are just made of felt with maybe a piece of wool batting for a little bit of comfort. You could also purchase turn shoes for infants. Like adult shoes, infant shoes had square toes, but you'll often see that around the ankle there'll be a little strip of the leather or otherwise the shoe fabric, and it will button around the front. Frequently in baby dressing guides of the period, it is mentioned that mothers like to put shoes on their infants, but it is not generally good practice. 1869 Cassie's Household Guide sums this up perfectly, so I'll just quote it. Up to a year old, the little knitted sock, all of soft wool, is the best foot covering for the infant human being. After that, when a child begins to walk a little and toddles from chair to chair, a similar knitted sock with a cork sole to it is all that is needed. As soon as it begins to get about on its feet, let it have little shoes. Very small pieces of silk, merino, or llama will make baby's quilted shoes. Place a piece of thin flannel next to the silk and line with cambric muslin, tack all together and quilt it. Any shoemaker will cut the mother a pattern for its shoe, and also a pair of cork or thin soft leather soles for them. It is easy, takes little time to make such a pair of shoes. When baby begins to walk out of doors, let it have easy black kid shoes with straps. These may be followed by very loose cashmere, end quote. Before we start talking about actual clothing, let's touch on hand versus machine sewing. It is always a hotly debated topic among mid-19th century reenactors and living historians. By 1860, thousands of sewing machines were in the hands of the regular household woman. There were machines available. I even own a circa 1860 sewing machine. It is rusted through and unusable, but I still do own it. Here in Texas, I can find sewing machines advertised for sale by December of 1845. And the family I used to portray here in Texas bought a sewing machine in 1847. However, I have a great many original 1860s women's and adults articles of clothing that are entirely hand sewn. It is entirely up to you whether you want to hand or machine sew. There are seams in all clothing that is going to have to be hand sewn and cannot be done by machine, even if you are doing a machine produced garment. But if you want to do the vast majority of seams by machine, have at it. I also want to touch briefly on sizing for infants' clothing. They do not do sizing like we do today, which is by months, say like newborn to 3 months or 3 to 6 months. That was really not done. Typically, you'll see first size and second size. And this is because outfits were meant to be very adjustable and they grew with the baby, which makes a lot of sense in a time period where you're having to do a lot of the sewing yourself. In some mid-19th century manuals, such as the Workman's Guide, first published in 1838 and then republished several times within the 1840s, say don't even bother making it the first size because the baby will grow out of it so fast, might as well just make the second size and just let it be a little big for a while. A really fun thing I very much enjoy about the 19th century is that clothing is not gendered for infants. Babies wore the same clothes whether they are girls or boys. You really don't start to see gender clothing for infants until the 20th century and the lovely invention of the ultrasound that allowed parents to see what they are having before it comes out. The 19th century tends to be a very practical century. There is no sense in making up 2 different wardrobes when you are only going to have, most likely, 1 baby and it will only be using one of those wardrobes. Why dresses? Well, from 16 years of working in my church's nursery, I can tell you it is infinitely easier to change a diaper when the child is in a dress as opposed to pants. It's all about practicality. So baby boys will be wearing stays, petticoats, and dresses just the same as the baby girls. At least until they are fully potty trained. When we start with the actual clothing, first we're going to start with belly bands, often just referred to as the band, and also occasionally called bandages. These are falling out of favor by 1860 and they're not strictly necessary, save for the very early days when the umbilical cord has not fallen off. A belly band is simply a strip of cotton, linen, or wool flannel that has been hemmed, although the Mother's Thorough Resource Guide in 1860 does say not to hem the flannel ones so as to not add more bulk. And these things tie or pin against the baby's torso is just to protect the umbilical cord area to keep it from hemorrhaging and potentially causing a danger to baby's life. And by the 1860s, the belly bands are typically taken off as soon as the umbilical cord falls off. Prior to that, it was also said that the belly band was supposed to strengthen baby's back and also protect and warm the bowels, but that was seen as nonsense by the 1860s according to the various mothering manuals. To make them, there seems to be an infinite way to do so. I have seen period directions that say cut them on the bias. I have seen period directions that say cut them on the straight. All 5 of my original belly bands have been cut on the straight, if that's any consolation. Some of the flannel ones are hemmed, some of the flannel ones say not to hem them, some of them are made double and then turned inside out, lining as for bags, as is typically the period way of stating that. Some had pleats in the back to support baby's back, others did not. There are so many ways to make a belly band. Mid-19th century books that talk about what should be in a baby's wardrobe of the 19th century do state that mothers should prepare 2 to 4 bandages or belly bands for their infant. However, if they were putting together a basket to give to the poorhouse, wealthier ladies as a form of charity could give them baskets for their babies. And if you are doing that sort of thing and getting a poor basket or creating a poor basket, it does say that there should be 2 bandages in there. Now let's talk diapering, a very important thing for a baby, correct? Cloth diapers are going to be used in the 19th century, of course. These cloth diapers are typically linen, as linen is highly absorbent. You can get it wet and it will still feel dry to the touch. And that will just prevent rashes and discomfort for the baby. Many mothering manuals suggest using very old tablecloths or otherwise very old linen. Linen gets softer and stronger and more absorbent the more you use it. Therefore, very used linen would be actually the best diapers. These cloth diapers I have seen described made up in 2 different ways, and I will describe those ways in a moment. And they can be fastened with straight pins as safety pins, although patented, were not around regularly, or they could be attached with ties. The 2 types of diapers mentioned in the Workwoman's Guide include what I call the bag method and the towel method, and those are my terms, not period terms. The bag method is where you take a rectangle that is roughly 44 by 22 inches. You fold it in half, right sides together, you have a fold on one end, you sew up the other 3 ends, leaving a little space, you turn the whole thing right side out, hem up that little space that you left, and you have a diaper. The towel method takes the same measurement, so 44 inches by 22 inches. But instead of folding in half, you just hem it all the way around. The bag method is much faster in making up, so actually doing the work, whereas the towel method is much easier to take that fabric after the nursery use for diapers, and you can actually use it as a towel. Those are typical dimensions for towels in the 19th century. I have personally found that those diapers are extremely large on a newborn infant to make, and I also prefer to make smaller diapers in preparation. But smaller diapers I find very useful are about 18 by 36 inches as opposed to the 44 by 22. Period sources state that a mother should prepare 2 to 6 dozen diapers to prepare for baby, depending on the mother's station. So poorer people would be expected to make more closer to 2 dozen, whereas wealthy women may want up to 6 dozen. For a poor box, it is suggested that you provide a dozen diapers. After the diaper comes the pilcher, sometimes also called the saver or the pilch. Essentially, it is a diaper cover. It is typically a triangle of wool flannel that is gathered at the top of the bias edge into a waistband that can then button or tie across baby's front. Since wool is water resistant, it does help keep wet from soaking through the baby's other layers and onto the caregiver's arm. Generally, you want to cut a soaker the same size as the square of the diaper, so either 22 inches for the larger diaper or 18 inches for the smaller diaper. You cut it down diagonally and you'll end up with 2 pilchers. Actually, many mothering manuals of the day do suggest that you not use pilchers, especially if the baby is with the nurse most of the day. And this is out of caution for nurses who may not be as attentive to their charge, may not be checking to see if the diaper is wet, thereby leaving the baby in a soaked diaper longer than is necessary. That could, of course, cause rashes and discomfort for baby. And so if you do not have the pilcher or saver, the wet will just seep through and the nurse will be forced to then change the diaper more frequently. Other period manuals actually omit them entirely, I assume for the same reason. However, having some sort of diaper saver makes a lot more sense for modern living history use. It prevents urine from getting everywhere. It also, if you choose to dress your baby in disposable diapers, a pilcher is a fantastic period cover to a diaper to make it look better. Period manuals do state that if you're making pilchers for your own baby, 4 to 6 pilchers are necessary, but none for a pour basket. Now let's talk about the shirt, occasionally called the chemise. I have found shirt more often pre-1860 and chemise a little bit more often post-1860. But they are basically the same article of clothing. They can be cotton, linen, or a blend of the 2 fibers. And they are white, like printer paper white. Not cream, not ecru, not off-white, they are white. And this is another article that there are so many ways to make shirts for baby. They range from being shaped very much like a chemise, with like a little neckband that buttons, to very basic squares and rectangles that fully open down the front. They're very easy to put on, and they overlap to provide more coverage, and that grows with baby a little bit better. I have seen mothering manuals suggest half a dozen shirts for a baby, all the way up to a dozen or even 1.5 dozens. For the pour box, it is suggested to provide 3 shirts. The next layer can vary some. For newborn infants, a flannel wrapper of sorts is very common. These are made plainer for nightwear or more ornamented with a nicer quality of flannel for daywear. These do not have sleeves, and they have little shoulder straps, and there's ties, and it will grow with baby as well because it's highly adjustable. These are usually made a yard long or perhaps a bit shorter. If you find that your baby is very sensitive to wool flannel, it is suggested that you can line it in linen. For slightly older babies just past the newborn stage, about a month or 2 old or so, a petticoat made of either flannel or cotton or linen. Now, because babies have no hips and therefore nowhere to set petticoats without them just sliding right off, you have a couple of options. First off is the stays. Now don't panic, these are not like women's corsets. These are literally bodices with little strips of yarn called cording that are sewn in pretty designs that it laces up the back just to be able to grow with baby. And then on the bottom you have button, and then the whole thing hangs from baby's shoulders. That is a baby's corset entire function, just a place to hang petticoats. The other option is to make a petticoat with a body, so a bodiced petticoat. This makes something that's very similar to a slip, and that is the other option. The problem is you cannot attach more layers to a bodice petticoat for warmth purposes, whereas if you have stays, you can button several layers. I have found for baby's button stays that I have made, I can get up to 3 layers onto those stays, therefore I can keep a child much warmer if it's extremely cold. Another option I have seen for very young infants is a sort of a bodice petticoat but without shoulder straps. It is literally like a band with a skirt attached and you pin it down the front. So there are lots of options for baby skirts and supports. In my personal opinion, I find the stays to be the best option because they do lace and they can grow, and also because you can attach more layers to keep a baby warm. I just find them much more versatile. But there are options. Whatever you use, it is suggested to have 4 to 6 petticoats for baby, 2 for a poor basket. Now we come to a slight dilemma because logically to us, we would now discuss dresses. But in period manuals, they always talk about nightgowns next because nightgowns are a form of body linen worn next to the body, as are all the other articles of clothing we have now discussed. So logically, to a 19th century person, you now talk about nightgowns because it's another form of body linen. So we're going to do the period thing and talk about nightgowns first. So hold your thoughts about underpinnings right now, and we'll go back to outer clothes in a minute. 4 to 6 nightgowns are recommended, with 3 going into the poor basket. Nightgowns are usually calico, and weirdly enough, the design for infants' nightgowns does not seem to change very much. I have seen the same ones in 1830 that I have seen all the way up through the 19th century. The only thing that really changes is more or less the needlework or the embroidery styles do change within that time frame, and that's the easiest way to date an infant's nightgown. Basically, they are typically long sleeved. We've already mentioned, except for stays and petticoats, you would just have, of course, your night flannel underneath. So nighttime baby is dressed in a belly band, a diaper, a pilcher, a shirt, the night flannel, and the nightgown. So those are the layers that we have. Nightgowns are typically very full in front with a band that kind of wraps around and comes back and ties in front. And this way, the gown that is very full will then fit baby for a very long time. And nightgowns are also quite long, again, to cover baby's feet to keep it warm. Now we can talk dresses. So remember that baby has a belly band if the umbilical cord has not fallen off, a diaper, a pilcher, a shirt, stays in petticoat, or possibly a bodice petticoat. And so now it's time for dresses. 3 to 4 dresses is recommended, although it is mentioned in Castile's household guide that if the mother's purse allows it, the number should be doubled. Many original baby dresses are embroidered, but rarely did the mother do the work of those herself. Those were bought ready-made, or at least already embroidered, and then the mother would cut them out and then sew them, and then do the sewing herself. In fact, the Mother's Thorough Resource Guide, again, 1860, specifically says that buying the bodices ready-made is significantly cheaper than making one up at home. Baby dresses of the 1860s are usually a yard long, but need to at least cover baby's feet plus a few inches. Most often they're going to be made of a fine white cotton, which is again easy to launder. Full gathered bodices are going to be very common as well, especially in the printed calico dresses or the plain white dresses. Paired with the usual drawstring at the neck and drawstring at the waistline, this means that it will grow significantly with babies. So no matter what size baby you end up having or how old the baby gets, it can generally be worn for a very long time. If you are looking to embroider your own baby's dress, Ayrshire work was very common in the early 19th century. It is starting to go out of fashion by 1860. So it's possible you could have an Ayrshire work gown. I myself, in the Pierce Collection Museum, which is a museum where my husband curates, there is a baby's dress that has a very clear mid-1860s skirt. The bodice style and the sleeve style lean much towards the mid-1840s to mid-1850s. That, coupled with the fact that the bodice has been heavily mended with it and embroidered over to hide the mends, suggests to me that it's probably an older family heirloom from mother or perhaps a much older sibling that has then been remade and updated for the new arrival. For a more popular style of embroidery, I would suggest looking at broderie anglaise or otherwise eyelet work with a little bit of satin stitch thrown in. Usually the embroidery is a bit sparser than Ayrshire work, which can be very dense, and there isn't as much pull thread work as in the embroidery itself as Ayrshire. In the early 1860s, we see the short, straight sleeve prevail. But by 1864, we see a little bit of a puff sleeve version come out that kind of prevailed for the end of the decade. These little puff sleeves aren't full all around as you see in the 1830s. They are very much flat on the bottom with a very big puff often gathered into a band. And so you kind of have this very odd puff with the little band that's only puffy on the outside, if that makes any sense at all. Skirts in the 1860s are again very long. Now let's talk a little bit about the other articles that make up a baby's wardrobe. Caps or head flannels are completely optional by the 1860s, especially if baby is born with hair. A bald baby is going to be more apt to have a head covering on, and the other reason you would need a cap is if you were to bathe baby. To keep it from catching cold, it is recommended to put a flannel cap until the hair dries. In the later 1860s, the white frilly caps are generally regulated to outdoor use underneath a cloak. The Mother's Thorough Resource Book does specifically state that hoods, socks, and caps ought to be bought rather than made, as they are cheaper that way. A shawl may be wanted to carry baby about. These are often flannel and can be worked at the edges or bound with the flannel, and typically they are lined in linen or cotton. Bibs are just starting to come into fashion in the late 1850s, so bibs are totally an option for 1860s. Godey's Lady's Book, Peterson's, and Castile's Household Guide all do have patterns and directions for making up 1860 style bibs, which are generally a much fancier shape and styled to modern round bibs. If making bibs a half of a dozen does seem to be the recommended number, and for out of doors, baby will need a cloak and hood. Made of wool and usually highly decorated, a cloak is just what it sounds like. It is a cloak, and it generally goes all the way down the whole of the dress. So they are quite long. Jewelry for the 1860 baby can vary.
Of other infant jewelry called ornaments, the Nursery basket has this to say. It has always been more or less the fashion to loop up an infant's sleeve. Armlets of gold, plain or with clasps set with turquoise, etc., or coral, flat or cut, fastened by gold clasps are the present style. Many mothers, however, keep to the simple and pretty baby fashion of using plain mantua ribbon an inch or two in width, providing a bolt or a roll of white, pink, and blue in the nursery basket, and will last through an ordinary babyhood and allows for pretty alternation. A small shield or cuff pin of gold is sometimes used for holding the little apron down to the waist. Apart from the armlets and the simple pin, we object to all jewelry for a newborn Christian child, although we have seen the unconscious little mortals tricked out in little chains, necklaces, bracelets, and rings." End quote. For other outerwear, of course, you can always find patterns for mittens and things of that nature as well. A good deal many patterns of all sorts can be found just by going to Godey's Ladies Books and searching the word infant. You will come up with very numerous patterns for any child's project you wish to work. I have also not found patterns for infant bonnets, I assume because you wouldn't take an infant out in the sun. You would generally shade their face with the cloak or with the shawl.
But baby does not typically get accessories as we think of them. No belts or anything of that nature. Now we have talked about infant wear. So what happens when baby begins to crawl about? And they are in those yard-long dresses. Well, when baby starts to show signs of movement, he or she is then shortened. This quite simply means that the skirts become shorter than the baby's legs, around knee length. About shortening, Cassell's Household Guide states, "It is, generally speaking, an unthrifty plan for the young mother to cut up her baby's long robes and underskirts to short-coat it. If her family increases, these long garments will be ready for new visitors, and it only takes 2/3 the material to make the little frocks and petticoats afterwards. It is one comfort, where economy is needed, to know that the expensive clothing for the first baby will cover the cost of 2 or even 3 more, and the first treble 2 will be sufficient for all, and only a few renewals will be wanted in the wardrobe." End quote. So new dresses should be made to the baby's height, so that he or she can then move freely. At this point, keeping the dresses and frocks clean is of utmost importance, because a mobile baby can get into all sorts of things. Therefore, a pinafore is put on top of the dresses to keep it neat and tidy, and by using a pinafore, the dress is safe from any dirtying of baby, and therefore the dress can be saved, and any dirtying of baby can quickly be remedied by a fresh pinafore, rather than a new dress. Compare the 4 or so recommended dresses with the 6 to 12 recommended pinafores. Pinafores come in all different styles. Sometimes they are print, especially if the dress is print, but you also see white ones. And again, they come in a variety of style, from sleeveless to little cap sleeves to little frills in the sleeve, all different styles and shapes.
For outdoor use, a Sacques, similar to an unfitted jacket, is going to be more common than carrying baby about in a shawl. It's also less cumbersome. These are typically wool. The nursery basket in 1854 does say of colored flannel, and they're very loose in the figure. In addition to the flannel, you can also, of course, make sacks of other wool such as merino or cashmere, and there are lots of embroidery patterns for these as well. The easiest way to finish them off, however, is to bind them with ribbon as opposed to doing all that embroidery.
What else would expectant parents need for an anticipated new arrival? Well, actually, baby needs have not actually changed much in the last 160 some odd years. Babies are still babies, so of course they will need a place to sleep. The cheapest and easiest route would be a wicker bassinet, very similar to what we'd call a Moses bassinet today, except much larger, and they typically have a hood, similar to what I remember as baby doll beds having. These would typically be covered all around with fabric to cover the wicker work. According to the Workwoman's Guide, it is sometimes covered in white, pink, or blue satin, but recently, and again this is 1838, begun covering very sensibly in glazed calico. Think of what we call polished cotton. Polished cotton did come in several colors back then, including green, brown, white, black, and blue, but color is not specified in the Workwoman's Guide, and therefore I don't quite know what would be appropriate, although most of the mid-19th century baby bassinets I have seen in paintings were covered in white. I have seen lower class paintings of the wicker bassinets not covered at all, but left plain. The wicker bassinets also do seem to have handles, and as they are often touted as being very popular due to the fact you can move them to whatever room the mother is in. In 1833's An Encyclopedia of Cottage, Farm, and Villa Architecture and Furniture, it says that the hood of the wicker bassinet may be put up and down at will. The Workwoman's Guide has several illustrations, and plans for making up various cribs and bassinets from ones on legs to rocking ones, etc., although most of them seem to be rectangular in nature other than the wicker ones. Paintings from the 1860s show elevated oval-shaped bassinets as being very popular, with ruffled fabric all the way around. For slightly older babies, elevated cribs, which again are rectangular with guardrails on wheeled legs, were available. In the Encyclopedia of Cottage, Farm, and Villa Architecture and Furniture states this on cribs, quote, "Cribs are bedsteads for children so young as to render it unsafe to trust them by themselves in beds with unguarded sides. They are generally intended to be placed during the night at the bedside of the mother, and for that purpose the height of the cribs should correspond with the height of the large bed, and one of its sides should be made to lift out." It also states that cribs generally come into use after the child is a year old and has been weaned. It was also possible to have one side taken out, as previously stated, then by hooks or other fastenings latched onto the mother's bed so that it attaches so the mother may have very easy access to her child throughout the night. Let's briefly touch on how to make up an 1860s baby's bed. Just to have it out there very plainly, this is for demonstration and display purposes only. There are very many things that were done back then that we now know to be very dangerous and contribute to many cases of SIDS or sudden infant death syndrome. So this is not something I would suggest for the modern infant whatsoever. This is going to be demonstration or display purposes for museums. But first would be the mattress, made of ticking or brown polished cotton, about 2 inches thick, stuffed with wool, horsehair, straw, seaweed, beech leaves, whatever you can find for stuffing essentially. Next would be a bed or a second mattress that is very thin and stuffed with down or feathers. Then there would be a pillow, also stuffed with down. Blankets made of wool flannel and coverlets would be used to cover the baby. A India rubber or leather sheet to prevent any body fluids such as urine from leaching into the mattress or bed. Other furniture for the nursery should include chairs for small children. The first type of chair, and I will use a modern term for this, would be a toilet chair. It holds a nightpan, similar to what we would call a chamber pot, and is used for the toilet training process. I have found references for a small stuffed flannel donut-shaped pillow to be placed so the child does not fall into the bedpan, and also so the hard bedpan does not hurt the child in any way. High chairs are also used when parents could afford them. It is stated that children are being put into these at the age of 12 to 14 months. High chairs of the era have a bar around the front to keep the child from falling out, but they generally do not include a tray as we are typically used to today. Sometimes high chairs can include a footrest and other times they do not. Small tables and chairs can be made for the nursery, particularly for very wealthy families, where those in the nursery took their meals separately from the rest of the family under the watch of their nursemaids. In addition, miniature little wash stands for small wash basins were available for washing up and teaching the child to take care of personal cleanliness. I have not found any references to any sort of changing table or mat, but I have found several original mid-19th century baby tenders or playpens. They are typically quite small, only a few feet in length and width, and look, in my opinion, like a miniature little wooden baby prison. Some of them even have little slots on the top for either snacks or toys. Other more superficial baby furniture was offered, but none of it was considered very essential. This would include things like an 1861 advertisement that I found for a baby tender that looks like a swing and is meant to hang from the ceiling, but it could also fold back to create a bed to sleep on, or the child could sit upright into it in the swing. According to the advertisement, it could be a sleeping couch, a hobby horse, a stylish carriage, a baby jumper, a nursery and dining chair, or a play and work stand, just with a few simple changes. It would probably not pass modern safety standards, I would assume. Other than furniture, what does the 1860s baby need? Well, first let's talk about basic cleanliness, beginning with diaper changes. For wipes, a natural sea sponge wet with warm water was often used, which makes us with modern sensibilities quite squeamish. But a sponge is soft against baby's skin. It can be washed, and the porous nature of the sponge and their natural shapes are cleansing, and they pick up wet and mess from baby's bottom. Another necessary addition to the changing table would be powder, and typically not recommended today for health reasons. Once the 19th century baby was then washed, and prior to a fresh diaper being applied, baby would typically be powdered, and this is just to dry the region. Baby was typically powdered with what essentially was a period hair powder, to keep baby's skin dry and prevent any rashes from occurring. A powder puff was often used for this purpose, and then baby was freshly diapered, pilchered, and sent on his way. The steps to a period diaper change would be to remove the soiled diaper and pilcher if you are using wash baby's bottom with a wet sponge, powder baby to dry the region, apply a new clean diaper, pinned or tied, and then the pilcher over top if desired. Several new mothering books stress that all diapers should be washed well and dried before being used again. Apparently there was a habit to take the wet-only diapers, dry them by the fire, and then reuse them without washing, but the mothering books do stress that this causes rashes and discomfort for babies, so it is poor practice. Castile soap was mentioned frequently for nursery use, including the washing right after birth. A period birth and what to do for a freshly born infant is going to have to be an entirely new episode on its own, but they did generally bathe newborn infants right after birth. A small bore bristle brush was also a necessary tool to obtain for babies, especially those with hair. Finally, let's touch on a few other things that you may want for an 1860s baby. A pincushion for baby is a very common gift. Honestly, pincushions are like the most common gift given in the 19th century. They are commonly described in ladies' magazines. They're all over, period crafting books. And they're appropriate for basically any situation, from weddings to births to craft fairs to birthdays. These came in a variety of styles, and the giver would then gift the cushion with the pins already in it. For a baby's pincushion, the pins would often spell out the word baby, for instance. The Workwoman's Guide contains directions for a baby's basket, or a basket that would contain all the things needed for birth. And that would include a bottle with a leather or parchment Sacques, which is the period term for a nipple, a large flannel shawl, a calico bed gown, this is going to be for the mother, a night flannel for baby, a night cap for baby, shirt, napkins, the flannel cap, and the flannel band, or the belly band, soft towel, sponge, haired brush, the powder bag or box, the pincushion, a large pair of scissors, and a ball of strong thread or twine. And that will just about wrap up this episode of One Woman is Twice Two Soldiers. Thank you so much for listening to my current research into dressing the 1860s baby. I've had a lot of fun researching for this one, and I look forward to doing more. Next episode, we'll be looking into homespun and my ventures into reproducing homespun, as well as we're going to talk about how I got into living history as a whole. So be on the lookout for that episode in the coming weeks. If you have any questions or comments, you can email me or find me on Instagram or YouTube under the name Caitlin Kearns. I truly hope you've enjoyed this episode of One Woman is Twice Two Soldiers. If you have, consider leaving me a review on Spotify or a comment on YouTube. And also, please don't hesitate to tell me any topics you'd like me to cover in future episodes. Have a fantastic week, and I'll see you back here in the next episode.